Yeah, I think the pandemic just exposed the huge gaps that exist, and it was time to make a change. I also think that there has been a lot of momentum building up over the years. That just this was the year to get those majority votes and do a really huge systematic push.
Thank you. Let's move on to the Walmart case because you asked them to disclose the details on their lobbying and the political spending, and it might be a little bit hard for Japanese audience to understand this sort of shareholder advocacy. Could you tell me the details from the basics?
Like I said, political spending and lobbying are two issues that cut across industries. We look to companies like Walmart because they have a huge influence over policymaking. Same with energy companies, commerce, healthcare, pharma. In the case of Walmart, our ask was, what is your state level and also your federal level spending on indirect lobbying? And what we mean by indirect lobbying is Walmart belongs to industry associations, or maybe it gives to grassroots groups that claim to be in favor of fair and just and transparent elections, but in fact they are not. And maybe these third parties are actually working actively to push voter suppression bills, like we saw in some states, or funding activities for politicians who were active in claiming that the election was stolen. So our question to Walmart was, your dollars directly influence the activities and drive the activities of these groups. How do you know that you are not complicit in these activities? And how can you claim you are in favor of a strong democracy if, to put it simply, if you're members of these groups and there's a big group of investors and advocates and civil society groups who want more transparency over where money is going to either politicians or to lobbying groups. So that we expect that to continue. I wanted to say that that Walmart vote was a very big deal. Although on the record, overall, the vote was around 22%. When you really take the insider shares out of the equation and you count the shareholders and how they voted, that proposal asking for indirect lobbying disclosure got over 50%, 54.2% to be exact. And that says a lot about what shareholders want to see with regards to transparency and getting a complete picture of Walmart's lobbying footprint and how it's spending to influence public policy.
I've seen lots of other cases, successful cases actually, on political spending and the lobbying actually this year. Could you tell me, if possible, how you try to get other institutional investors on board?
I think any investor will favor disclosure and transparency above all, no matter what the political leanings might be. So that's number one, but also corporate influence in politics is, it's been a really powerful, it has had a very powerful effect And it's sometimes very clear where companies have had their hand in local politics, but also at the federal level. No investor would support a company fighting against the mission or principles that it is committed to. So a company that talks about sustainability or writ large from an environmental impact perspective to Black Lives Matter should not be talking out of the other side of its mouth to subvert or suppress things like voting rights or more disclosure of equal opportunity employment data or EEO1 data, which is the holy grail of diversity data. If companies are fighting against that and then actually talking about the virtues of sustainability, that is a net zero situation. We think that it's clear that investors want to own companies in their portfolio that are moving in the right direction and speaking in one voice and not trying to subvert and work towards something on the other hand and kind of cancel itself out. So that's an easy business case to make to investors, and lobbying and political spending are really now an issue that all investors are on board with, who consider this potentially damaging and reputationally damaging for a company if they are exposed, and they have been exposed and they have been damaged in the reputation.
It's wonderful. We've seen many successful ESG activism this year, and this might be a little bit of related with the pandemic from last year. Do you see the big reasons, factors?
It's been a fascinating year where we investors who have filed resolutions have gotten majority votes on issues that we would not have really gotten much of a vote earlier. Political spending is one of them. Climate change transition plans are another. Then climate lobbying is another issue that has gotten majority votes. I think the pandemic has really exposed the social inequities that we were discussing before, but also just how entrenched companies are in either fighting for climate mitigation and being part of the solution, or they continue to dig in their heels. In the case of Exxon, it was very clear that again, if you continue to have the same board members, that nothing is really going to change. And engine number one succeeded in making that point. And let's hope and see how it's going to go. I think the pandemic just exposed the huge gaps that exist, and it was time to make a change. I also think that there has been a lot of momentum building up over the years, that just this was the year to get those majority votes and do a really huge systematic push. I also think that in the last few years, the big institutional investors, the Vanguard, State Street, BlackRocks, have really improved the way that they are voting their proxies. And that has been an in-house development as they themselves adopt ESG strategies in their funds as universal owners. And that's a whole other conversation of what our view is in that. But I think they have improved their proxy voting record. T. Rowe Price is another one that has improved. That lent more support to proposals that collectively raise the vote results. There's still a long way to go with, I think, the large institutional investors and how they view ESG and how they think about impact. I think that's one big differentiator between them and the investors like us who think about the impacts and work on shareholder advocacy.
I also reckon that it's getting difficult to make a difference in ESG because lots of method and data are emerging in this category. Would that be possible to share your method in Zevin Asset Management to make a difference?
Because we are actively thinking about this. How are we different? And this is something on the minds of many investors who have been around since before the big ESG mainstreaming that we all wanted. We've been around since 1997 and doing this for a long time. The bigger shops like BlackRock, to use your example, have adopted ESG in robust ways, but they have also, because they are so big, relied on third-party ESG data. Third-party ESG data is provided by MSCI, Sustainalytics. They're the two largest ESG research providers, along with now ISS, with ISS Ethics now providing climate and ESG-related data. Plugging in that data into your model and building a portfolio using this data is not going to solve the world's problems. It's a way to identify the better performing companies from a disclosure point of view, but also the performance point of view, checking the box, do these companies have the policies that they need to have? And then moving on. We don't think this is enough. We think that ESG data has come a long way from 10 years ago, where we didn't really have much really to use. Now, Sustainalytics and Bloomberg are using AI-driven technologies to scour the world's news, to assemble ratings for companies. This is what large institutional investors are using. That is not what we think of true ESG integration. We think that you need to, as an investor, go a step further to understand what are not just the risks that a company is experiencing and whether they are handling that risk from a regulatory, reputational, license to operate perspective, but what are the impacts that companies are having in today's world? And how are they dealing with those impacts, whether they're environmental, pollution impacts, or the impacts of being involved in lobbying and what the repercussions are for society. Those are important issues that maybe aren't risks to the company just yet, but we think they are when companies are again, not acting in congruence to what they say they're going to do. So that doesn't show up in those ratings. So we need to go further than that. And I think the mainstreaming of ESG has been great to bring environmental, social, and governance issues into the mindset of an investor, but we cannot stop at just ratings and integrating data that way.